Kalisperasas, and welcome. We have a truly unique night planned for you with our special guest, Mr. Andrew Liveris. As you know, Andrew has graciously agreed to have a broad and expansive conversation with Mr. John Mangos tonight about his career, global issues, politics, the economy, and how to stay globally relevant.
Well, Fiona, thank you for those very generous introductions. Andrew, they were so generous. I think we're done for the night. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for coming. Write your checks.
What a thrill it is, not just to be in conversation with you, but to be in conversation with you here in Darwin, your hometown. So that's where I want to start. The young Andrew Liveris, small Australian city, young man with big ideas. His parents came from a small Greek island. The young man had big ideas. So my question to you is, what was burning in the belly of that young chemical engineer in those days?
Well, I don't know about burning in the belly. I'm not even sure I had big ideas. I think just touring the town again today, you realise, like McLaughlin Street and Mitchell Street and all the generous things that Fiona had to say about where I started, you kind of realise how small it was now. But back then, it felt huge. It felt huge to get on the bike and go down to the basketball courts and, get to play basketball with the DCRC. You guys all know what that was? Dow Chinese Recreation Club. With a bunch of my neighbours and cousins and friends who were different ethnicities. And in retrospect, what you found out about this notion of growing up in a small place that you thought was big is you look back at it and say, I grew up in one of the most diverse places in the world. I grew up with people who would eat satay as much as they'd eat souvlaki or as much as they would eat laksa. At the prep markets today, I try to find a satay. Nick Mitros did a reasonable job of buying one. But it was a place where, we didn't really think about our ethnic differences. I don't think I had big ideas other than this almost accidental, maybe genetic, love of science back then. I was, for some reason, good at chemistry and physics and maths. I might credit that to the Encyclopedia Britannica salesman that knocked on the door of our house in McLaughlin Street. My father, God rest his soul, I was begging him to buy the entire set because I wanted to have the Encyclopedia Britannica. For those of you who don't know what that was, that's way before Wikipedia and all that. And he said to me, I'd buy it on one condition, that you read the whole lot. So I did. I read the Encyclopedia Britannica.
So you are literally a walking encyclopedia.
I felt like that. And then I saw the world in that encyclopedia. I saw that the horizons were more than just Humpty Doo and, just where we used to go for Greek Easter and slaughter a goat or two. Did I say that? I mean, it just felt that the boundary wasn't just here, that there was a bigger boundary, and I wanted to go explore it.
But Andrew, what I want to explore is this. It's one thing to be a brilliant young scientist, which you were. It's another to be a leader. And I'm not patronising you now, but you had a stellar career in Southeast Asia, and it took you to America, and you fast-tracked it to the top. What set you apart from your peers? You clearly had leadership skills.
Hunger.
Hunger for money? Hunger for success?
No.
What was it?
Hunger to make a difference. Hunger to help everyone around me be better. Hunger that always helped the weak, always helped the people who needed help. Community, back to Darwin. A sense that you're not one, that you're a community, that you're a parea, that you need to put two hands together to make it work. And that distinguishing skill and humility. Be hungry, stay humble. This town taught me humility. I got an often reference that, why do I come back? Why do I say I'm from Darwin? I'm very proud of that because, I consider myself a Darwin boy. I consider myself an Australian. I consider myself my community. And I express myself through community. As you make your way up, whatever you do, okay, greed, envy, jealousy, selfishness, narcissism, you lack self-awareness, suddenly you think you're it, and you're not it. You are enabling everyone around you, okay, to make a big impact. And that leadership skill, wherever that came from, innate, maybe born here, maybe it's partly genetic, that's what I carried all the way up. I can be a tough person, but I'll always be tough with a smile. And along the way, when you treat people with respect and try to get them to be better, they'll take toughness.
So the assassin's smile, if I may call it that, saw you clearly make your way up through the American ranks.
Yeah.
Now, you're an outsider.
Yeah.
How did they take it that this Aussie, and they wouldn't have known where Darwin was, but the Australian, you were the Aussie, suddenly you're running a global company called Dow.
So at the University of Queensland, when all the interview process was going on about where to go work, the thing that distinguished the Americans interviewing young Australians like me versus anyone in Australia, Australian company, any British company, is the Americans basically were saying, you join us, and it doesn't matter where you're from. You'll be as good as you can be, and we'll allow you that. The more British-style companies, Australian-style at the time, were much more, time and grade, much more bureaucratic, much more, you had to go spend 5 years doing this, then 8 years doing that. And that system stifles talent. And as we're seeing in today's millennials, entrepreneurship and startup culture is here because you can control your own destiny. I was an entrepreneur within the American system because the Americans like that. The American multinationals breed that. And it doesn't matter whether you're from Timbuktu or Darwin or Missouri. If you show you've got talent and leadership, the Americans will reward that. That's what I interviewed. That's what they promised. That's what they delivered. And I'm not unique. 6 CEOs in a row in Dow were from places other than the US.
None of those previous 6 were the architects of a master merger, the merger with DuPont. And I want to ask you 2 things about that. Why did you need to do it? And I know you've answered this question before, but it leads us to the second one. As we're seeing more merger activity, is that the template for the future? Bigger, stronger, better?
Yeah, so first I'll correct your premise. Dow, over its 120 odd years of history, has had 6 major transformations to stay relevant in the era it was in at the time. And that's because we were courageous to bet the company. But the bigger the company, the tougher the bet. So when I was made CEO and it became clear to the board and I that we were being squashed out of existence by the state-owned enterprises coming out of subsidized countries, by the private equity guys who are running things for cash and short term, that companies like ours needed to transform. And I saw that the way to transform, and the board supported, that we had to rediscover innovation, that we had to become inventive, innovative, agile, entrepreneurial. You try and change 65,000 people by telling them be more entrepreneurial, you're dead. You're dead. You can't do it. Cultural change is the hardest thing you do. People ask me, what would you do different now that you know what you did and how you did it? What would you do different? I'd say, well, you won't like the answer. I wouldn't try it. It's that hard. And so we knew we had to change to this new innovative way of work. The DuPont company, innovative as it was also dying of the same death. And so what we decided to do, I tried 3 times to buy DuPont, and persistence, by the way, is another attribute. I persisted, and when the CEO, this more recent one, agreed, we put a deal together in 9 weeks. We did it, with all due respect to the lawyers in the room, without a lawyer, without a banker, okay? We did it, just the 2 CEOs, basically squirreling away all over the place so no one could catch our trail. And we emerged with about 20 pieces of paper that we put together, then handed it to the lawyers. 400 lawyers and 500 bankers later, we got the deal done. And of course, it made a big impact to the markets. Why that had to be done was the markets have become incredibly impatient. The death of large American global-based enterprises that are diverse, GE, Procter & Gamble, Dow, DuPont, UTC, all these companies, Honeywell, they're all dying because owners are impatient. They want money now. Short-termism, which has led to the other disease of humanity, populism, is becoming our new problem, your problem. You're not getting investments in Darwin because the bankers who are possibly going to fund those investments see that an LNG plant's going to take 20 years to get a return. They ain't going to do it. So you need a new fabric of society, and to do that, you have to recreate the enterprise that operates in society. And that recreation to get away from short-termism has been my work at Dow, and now my new work, putting a lot of work into that. And to do that, I need to operate with governments that give me certainty. Give me a government that gives me certainty. Anyone in the room?
Probably not in this country at the moment.
How many prime ministers has Australia had in the last 7 years?
Yeah.
So even this country, as developed as it is, as institutionally strong as it is, as incredibly talented as the people are, can't give us anything other than Italy. You know, we're the Italy of the Western world at the moment. I think this problem, we saw it at Dow, and what we had was the courage to take 60,000 people and say, we're going to merge with another 60,000 people, and we're going to create 3 amazing new companies that are going to survive and thrive in this new world of ours that only rewards short-termism.
Since you put it in that time frame and you've mentioned the northern end of Australia, you've mentioned this territory, let's have a look at this territory's relevance to the region from your global perspective. Energy's big on the agenda, gas, of course. Where do you see this region, given your global experience having come from here?
Yeah, and if I can just take out your lens a second to all of Australia and then come back in to the specific part of your question, the northern part of Australia. So I've been coming back to the country for a long time, but especially when I was CEO, and I was saying the country needs policy shifts in 2 major areas. And all these prime ministers and all these federal ministers that I talked to from John Howard on never put them in place. And so policy shift number 1 was a coherent energy policy. This country still lacks that, and I'll come back to that when I get to Northern Australia. The second is an innovation policy. Now, I have good news to report to all of you. It's beginning. The elite G8 universities in the country, CSIRO, is beginning to put together mechanisms to take young, mostly young, but not necessarily just young people, and actually from deep tech, which is science-based stuff, you know, physics, maths, chemistry, all that, all the way to soft tech, which is software, cloud, AI, all the things that we're used to in the internet, and figure a way to marry the idea to money, advise it, and create companies. That policy and the energy policy, those 2 things, if Australia did those 2 things, it would give its next generation of kids an amazing future, better than the great past we've had. We can rejoice in our past. We can celebrate it. We live in an amazing nation. It's got amazing things. It's got amazing systems to look after us, but it hasn't got its next act worked out, and it's taking too long to get it. It's tumbling down the scale. So Northern Australia, on energy in particular, I really do feel like I've spent the last decade hitting my head against that wall. I really do feel that as good as the people up here are, that they have not been able to convince governments, mainly the Fed, as well as companies, to do anything other than to build refrigerators and ship your precious material offshore. It is a national travesty that the gas in this country is leaving to go to Japan, China, and Korea. National travesty, while Australians are paying high-priced power. It's an absolute total mistake and a failure in policy. Especially when you start to say, I'm not going to do coal, I refuse to do nuclear. You think you're going to get affordable power from the sun and the wind? Someone sold you a bill of goods. Renewables are not affordable today. They'll take another dozen years, probably, to be affordable, and you can't find your way to base power them anyway. You need to base power out of gas. And what do you have up here? You have a ton of gas. God bless whoever came up with the idea to lift the moratorium. Okay, bingo, first big start. Now we've got to get the gas out of the ground and keep it in the country to create jobs. Big time, great, new, high-paying jobs. And this sector needs a value add like no tomorrow. Rather than ship it off refrigerate and ship it off. You get one job from doing that. If you value added, you get 5 to 8 jobs.
Can we touch also on the infrastructure fund, which, as far as I understand, it's either been too difficult to access or too restrictive. And to me, that's a checkbook that says, go forth and prosper.
So you mentioned, or Theona mentioned in the introduction, I'm advising the Saudi government.
Which I'll get to later.
Yeah, but they are, right now as we speak, I'm advising them on spending money to build pipelines across their country, roads across their country, fast rail across their country, connecting all their population centres to allow their population's freedom of movement. So how many road systems do we have crossing the country? How many pipelines do we have crossing the country? What?
Yeah.
Where's all our infrastructure fund going? Now, I must say, returning to Sydney, Paul and I have been quite impressed at the upgrade to Sydney's infrastructure. Melbourne's done a phenomenal job. We've had pockets of infrastructure spending going on. Perth looks great, Adelaide looks great, but boy, oh boy, are we missing the plot, okay? We've not opened up this entire country. We need to put roads, rail, and pipelines across this country, okay? And if you're asking me what's in the pipeline, gas, in case you haven't got that point yet.
I'll come to it in a moment, but American presidents have sought your wise counsel. But before we get to that, and because we're on the subject, have Australian leaders sought your wise counsel? If not, why not? And if so, what have you told them and why didn't they do it?
Certainly they have, and I must say I've had terrific relationships with John Howard. I'm trying to get them all in a line. John Howard, Kevin Rudd, Julia Gillard,
Kevin Rudd,
Tony Abbott, and then Malcolm. I'd say I'd have better luck with some than others. They all suffered the same problem that I've already implied is in existence in Western democracies, in that they were all more worried about the next election than the right policies. Politics and policy are disconnected in all of our societies. When we vote for people now, we're voting for what? We're voting for what they say. When you vote them enough times and they don't do what they say, okay, then what they're going to do is actually bend the truth to get re-elected. So what I found is if it was an expedient issue that could be talked about to the electorate in a way that got them elected, they would pay attention to that.
Sure. And obviously the instability in our federal leadership has taken their eyes off the ball of the main game of not just running the country, but prospering the country.
Yeah, so I don't want to be too damning. This country's had the longest run of growth in the OECD. It's been a phenomenal ride for, I'd credit Hawke and Keating for a phenomenal run for Australia that John Howard doubled down on. So it set the country up to actually outperform most. I'm talking mostly to these leaders about setting it up for the next 30, 40 years. I think the run, if you look at wage inflation, we've got deflation in this country, big problem. But you've got a massive bubble, household debt, all-time highs. You get a little bit of interest rate here, you watch this economy crash. If you want to talk about doom and gloom stuff, China's right now going through a massive credit squeeze. If you're thinking that your commodities are going to get you out of this, you've got at least 18 to 24 months of China's consumption going down. The Chinese are suffering right now, okay, under what is in essence a tightening of credit. So, and the trade war that's going on is not helping that. So I think we're in a period of time where this economy is going to start faltering. And that's where the politicians have to jump in and say, here's my vision of how I'm going to create jobs and economic growth. As I said to you earlier today, growth forgives all sins. But boy, if you don't get growth, some of these lack of policy decisions will come home to roost.
And does that also talk, Andrew, to your firm belief that the Americans have a greater appetite for risk? And do we need to step up in that department so that we can get that forward growth?
Again, my good news to you on innovation, I've done 2 tours now through the East Coast of Australian universities. As you know, I've put substantial funds into the University of Queensland to create an innovation institute. So I'm putting our money where our mouth is, or my mouth is. I would tell you that the report card on what I'm seeing is great. This next generation of young Australians, I'll give you the statistic that the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Queensland told me. He said 10 years ago, 90% of all undergraduates and graduate students at the University of Queensland would want a corporate career like I've had. 90% today want to run a startup. They want to go into startups. And they're getting money. And the money's arriving, by the way. The venture funds are growing. I think that's a sea change in the attitude of what success could be like in this country. And I actually maybe I should credit Malcolm Turnbull for that specifically, but it's really the funds that are flowing to these universities to create these incubators, like the CDU one that is here.
I mentioned the American presidents.
Yeah.
A lot of people in the room, I know, because during drinks, they said to me, don't forget to ask him about. So let's just tick them off in order.
Which particular president?
Well, let's start from the first one. It was George W. Bush, was it not? The first American president who sought your counsel?
Right.
Now, let's have a snapshot of he and his successors, and we'll linger a little on the incumbent in a moment. Snapshot, George W. Bush.
Funny guy. Funniest guy you'd ever want in person. Just a very, very easy person to work with. Totally dominated by big oil.
Mm-hmm.
His policies were all geared to how to make America bigger, not necessarily better.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, he had the 9/11 thing, which, of course, was a major, the war.
He took America and the world to a war we didn't need to have.
Exactly. And lots of books have been written on that. Colin Powell and George Tenet and everyone who's now talked about it said that that was a complete disaster because Saddam Hussein did not have
Weapons
WMD.
of
So
mass destruction.
and here we are all that many years later with a dysfunctional Iraq. That should be very, very, very symbolic of the Saudi discussion if we get around to that.
No, we will,
Yeah.
because I think it's very important, especially
Yeah.
given your current status with the Saudis. But let's move then to your closer friend, Bill Clinton. Clearly, history will remember him as a very competent president.
Probably smartest president the country's ever had. Charismatic. I didn't work with him when he was president. I worked with him after he was president, including at THI. Loves Greeks. Loves Greeks. Loves
Well, he's
Greece.
only human.
Very smart.
Very smart. And also smart was Barack Obama.
Yeah.
And he sought your counsel, and something tells me that history is not going to remember Obama's presidency as kindly as Clinton's.
He certainly did something that the world, when he was made president, when we got elected, and that very famous night in Chicago when he and Michelle came out, didn't you all get goosebumps to see an African American standing there as the leader of the free world? Wasn't that a poignant moment in history that we'd say, wow, look at that. Look at from where he came from. So celebrating that to his actual presidency, he had the mistake, unfortunately, that, and, I think I've been guilty of it too, that when you think you're the smartest person in the room, you need to get smarter people around you. And he didn't have that type of team. In fact, the team he had around him complained, Rahm Emanuel being the first casualty, complained that he didn't listen to them. I mean, look, honestly, as a world leader, he got a Nobel Peace Prize 2 minutes into his presidency, right? So did he deserve it? Probably not. But did people like the idea of an Obama? Of course they did. Yeah. But you've got to, between idea and execution, it's all about team. And if you don't build the best team, you're going to fail. And even the best leaders fail because they don't put the best team around them. Obama did recognize the innovation point. That's why the work we did on advanced manufacturing, we created 10 innovation hubs in the country that mimic Silicon Valley. They're all thriving right now, and President Trump's claimed them as his, which is, I guess, a typical thing he would do. But that was Obama.
Sure.
He did that.
Sure. Okay, well, let's get to the incumbent. And I'm going to start by asking you this. I know you're on the record saying of President Trump that he's driven, that he's conscious of who he is, that he's a perfectionist, that a lot of mistakes are made about him, that he's playing out the role, that he rewards loyalty and he fires disloyalty. Now, they're your words. In today's Fairfax Press...
When did I say that?
You said that earlier this year in Melbourne.
All right.
Today, in the Fairfax Press, esteemed political observer Dr. Ann Summers said this of the same man. He has no political skills. He doesn't know how to govern. He's unmoored and dangerous. He's fighting for his political life. What is it about this man, Andrew Liveris, that we don't know?
Well, all of what... Who said that?
Ann Summers, Dr. Ann Summers.
All of what she said, she's right, and not in Congress with what I said. So Trump is not a politician, doesn't want to be a politician, abhors all things politics, is running the most unconventional presidency known to humankind, is governing from the center. He's really more a Democrat than a Republican. He's destroying the Republican Party. They've had to remake themselves in his image, which is the last thing some people... Paul Ryan left because he could not bring himself to doing what he needed to do to get re-elected to be a Trump. So this is not a character that role models any of our kids. This is a guy who's in it for himself. He's a winner. And he's a self-professed business winner, and he loves business. Why I'm an admirer of what he's doing is because he's made business better in the country. When President Obama was president, we had in the manufacturing sector an explosion in regulations of the wrong kind. All those regulations have been peeled back, and now business is investing again in the United States. The tax cuts, the lack of regulation, or the lowering of regulations, and some of the other things he's doing to make it easier for foreign investment to come to the country, and then the protection of the American company in China. He'll go down those three things as his most massive accomplishments as a president, and create jobs as a result.
See, what I find interesting about his presidency is this, that when it happens in the taxi industry, Uber, it's called a disruptor. Disruptor is the new buzzword. When it happens in the hotel business, Airbnb, it's a disruptor. Yeah. Is it fair to call this man a disruptor?
Yeah.
Has he disrupted the traditional model of POTUS?
Look, he's so upset with the American political system, but so is the American people. The American people are upset. Outside of New York, Washington, and Los Angeles, everyone in America is upset that this generation is less well off than the previous generation, that the middle class is disappearing, that the rich are getting richer, that the elite that have houses in the Hamptons and yachts, that greed and envy are winning the day, and that money's begetting money, and the person in Missouri, in a factory in Texas, the Arizonas, all these places have lost out. So he's elected because they don't trust anyone else. And frankly, he's promised them that he's going to look after the little guy. Now, the little guys, there's plenty of those. We lived amongst them in Michigan. Paula would go on walks with educated, college-educated friends of hers who'd say they'll vote for Trump, females, because his personality to one side, which is abhorrent. I mean, you know, you don't want to go near his values. But in the context of, I'm going to make this political system, disrupt it, yes, I'm going to completely transform it, okay? I think what's happening in America is the creation of a third party. We finally are probably going to see a third party. By the way, in this country, you have the same issue. The center of government's disappeared. The only centrist government probably left in the free world is Macron in France, and he's probably not going to last. I think the world, in democracy and capitalism, have lost their way together as a married couple. Capitalist democracies can no longer do what they did so well since World War II, which is distribute wealth fairly. And how to fix that, it's not communism, it's not socialism. It needs to be a rebuild of our institutions and a rebuild of the people who go into politics so that we don't get a repeat of the Trump-like disruptor. Because it is a fairly large embarrassment to look at someone like him and say, how did he get there?
Well, that's right. I mean, he doesn't do himself any favours, does he?
No, he doesn't want to.
When CNN reports something he doesn't like, he just calls it fake news. Now,
yeah, but CNN is a disgrace. CNN is a disgrace. They have gone so far left. I mean, Paula has it on occasionally. I can't watch it. Actually, to be honest, and she's my witness, I can't watch any so-called cable news stations anymore, including your Sky here. Sorry, I haven't offended.
No, it's okay. I've been sacked by all of them. It's all right.
And so, no, I think Peter Credlin is culpable in the bringing down of Malcolm Turnbull. Whether you agree with that or not with Malcolm Turnbull.
No, everybody agrees with that.
No, but then who's behind her, right?
Tony Abbott.
Fake news. So we have this whole... So what we've got to worry about is, where are you getting all your information from? Who are you trusting? Where's your credible source? What is your source? If it's the TV news, stop it immediately. Turn it off the set. If it's the newspaper, check the journalist. And so if you value that person's opinion, by all means read it. I mean, people ask me, what do I read? And I've stopped pretty much reading every newspaper, with the exception of possibly The Economist and possibly the Financial Times. But even they are losing the plot. We have a major problem with information dissemination. And how do we get our information?
I'd like to move on,
Please.
obviously. I think we've touched that comfortably and in a nice,
Why did the
humorous
lights go on like
manner.
that?
I don't know. I think maybe they...
Is there a mole in the house?
Either that or somebody got spooked by your gas comment and paid the electricity bill. Let's talk about your Hellenism and how it drove the inception of THI, because this is, and moving out of your, obviously your corporate role now, this is the philanthropic Andrew Liveris that we all know and love.
I think the Hellenic part of me was kindled by this great desire to belong to a community that actually valued history. I am a student of history. I celebrate history. Nick Pappas is you heard his resume. He's a great role model for me. I mean, in the way he studies history and brings it all to our currentness. And you know, whether you're an academic or whether you're a person on the street, you have to be a learner. And so Hellenism for me is a value system that's existed for 2,500 years or longer. And because that value system was being attacked so viciously in the period of time of the financial crisis, you know, 2011, 12, there was a whole period of time when the word Greece was seen as a very negative word.
Yeah.
And I didn't like that at all. I thought I had the podium, and a part of my responsibility to my history, to my parents, to my family, was to stand up and be counted that Hellenism mattered, and that you don't change 2,500 years of history in a 3-year, 4-year period of time.
But I think your benevolence was outstanding, because most of us thought at the time, as we don't often with other countries, it was Greece's own fault that they got into that problem.
Of course, and we can do this all the time. You asked me about leadership earlier. If someone like me in a leadership role was always blaming the other, then shame on me. I shouldn't be a leader. I should be rejected from leadership. I should be finding answers and solutions. I never accepted meetings in my company from people who just came into me and dumped the problem on me. They had to have a solution. If they didn't have a solution that I liked, I would tell them and get a better solution. But we need to have answers and solutions to help our young people learn how to learn to become better leaders. So for Greece for me wasn't defined by Greece creating its own problem. And there's a whole thing you could say about, well, was it the German banks, or was it the IMF, or was it whatever? I never got into that discussion. I got into a discussion that said something very simple. Does Hellenism have value to this world? And
Yes.
do the people that are Hellenes, and Philhellenes, by the way, who stepped up also, should they all step up? There's 6 million Hellenes around the world, Greeks, Hellenes, and there's 11 million in Greece. That's about the ratio of Jews in Israel and Jews around the world. And look what the Jewish people do for Israel. I mean, my goodness sake, how proud can you be to be Jewish and to create this country? Now, they had an existential crisis. You might argue that Hellenes didn't have an existential crisis like the Jewish people. Clearly did not. But okay, let's go to Ireland. Okay? And the Irish had a few crises, but not unlike Greece. Look what the Irish people do for Ireland. So why aren't the Greeks helping Greece to preserve this value system? And whether we believe or not that the politicians in Greece are of any value, and you know, we can have a long discussion on that. I have my own answer on that. And whether the island we invest in is corrupt, we have answers on that too. I mean, or whether we take money over there and we give it to a partner and we lose our shirt, answers on that. That isn't what we're trying to fix. If we can't fix that overnight, that took decades to build. We have to get young Greeks to believe in their country again. That Hellenes in Greece should believe in them. So we have to work from the institution up. So that's what Nick Pappas went through. That's what the THI is rebuilding Hellenes from the ground up.
And that's what I wanted to ask you specifically about. We saw some beautiful statistics of the real things that have been done.
Yes.
The meals that have been provided, the hospital care,
Yes.
etc., etc. You are on the record, and you've just said it again, we need to change the institutions of Greece. But who are we to say that to the Greek government, whoever that government is? How do we do that without meddling with their domestic affairs?
So again, if you're dealing with a problem that's intractable, so you just defined one, the politicians of Greece, I could be very heretical and do something my wife sometimes cringes at and say, we have another problem, the Church of Greece. Okay? Now, if I look at those two institutions, who am I or any of you to say you're going to change those overnight? You can't. Or
No.
we can, but you try, but many others have tried. So here's the better solution. Show them a better way. Build a complete new way of doing things. And do it in a way that makes those two institutions look over at you and say, I want to be them. You know, create a sense of, I can win, I can solve things, I can achieve. Okay? Of course, feed the basic needs, the hunger and all that. We've got to take care of that. That's the philanthropy. But to rebuild people's courage and sense of self and worth, that's a job we can do. Thank you, Helen. Yeah.
Obviously,
Fantastic.
obviously, the branches of THI have tapped into a very generous diaspora.
Yeah, I wouldn't say very generous.
Oh, would you like to say very generous? Should it be better? Should
It
we be giving more?
It should be way better. But so let me peel away. So I'm not speaking to Darwin or THI Australia right now. I'm speaking to THI the US. We've only just scratched the surface of THI US. I mean, the amount of successful Greek Americans is staggering. But they have the same problem that you just described. They've been burnt once too many. They don't want to go over there willy-nilly and just give money because they believe the Greeks will pilfer and do all the bad things that they probably would do. So what we've got to do is, over time, you know, become more generous by demonstrating success. So, I mean, THI Australia went over and worked with Burumi and saw success in the eyes of the young people that were getting food. And when you do it and you make it that personal, then people will become more generous. When you take a holiday over there, dedicate 2 or 3 days to go to some of our charities and volunteer, as some of the young people in the room have done already from CDU. Just show up. Maybe take a young entrepreneur that we've sponsored out to lunch and tell them what it takes to build a business. A lot of successful business people in this room. Show them, teach them. Maybe get to know them over a period of time and then sponsor them. These are little things that build to big things. And as you build them, they build others. So I really do believe it's very achievable. When I started this with George Stamus, I said to everyone who came into the room that was part of that initial launch, including President Clinton, who totally endorsed this, think decades. It took decades to get us here. It'll take decades for us to get this rebuilt. You know, and I think we're off to 5 years of phenomenal start. THI US obviously is much bigger and can do a lot more things. THI Australia and what it's doing, I got to tell you, the governance here, you'll hear from our new CEO later. I mean, Nick and Helen and all the board members I'm forgetting that are in the room, Jim Raptis, all the people here have dedicated their time to this and have brought the Greek communities of Australia together. And then on top of that, to you non-Greeks in the room, the Philanines of Australia have come together. And I got to tell you, that is a tremendous amount of achievement. Very proud of them, and I really do think they might outstrip the US here eventually.
Wow, that's a nice call. It would be remiss not to ask you about Saudi Arabia. You were advising the Saudi Arabians, their government sovereign fund. There are global suspicions about the Saudi Arabian agenda. What is it?
Well, I don't know about the suspicions about their agenda per se. I will tell it this way. Let me frame it. If you look at the world's geopolitics, the biggest schism we have in the world that's not yet solved is in the Middle East. If you assume that Rocket Man's under control, which we don't know if he is or not, but let's assume that President Trump's got him under control, then the schism in the Middle East is getting wider, and the Sunni states, led by Saudi Arabia, and the Shia states, led by Iran, are expanding that and are creating a proxy war that's being fought out in Syria with Russia on one side and the US and the free world, European, on the other side. If there's ever any fear of another world war, it's there, okay? It's right there. If we don't reinforce and fortify Saudi Arabia, we will have a catastrophic event on our hands. And here's the other good news, and you can ask your next question.
Sure.
Israel is aligning with the Sunni states. Now, if I ever told you that there's a hope that the Israelis can reconcile with the Arabs, and it will happen through the Sunni states, it's because of the old adage, right? The enemy of my enemy is my friend. And that's what's going on with Israel and the Sunni states. That's why we should be helping Saudi Arabia.
Given what you have just said, can we trust Saudi Arabia?
Look, their agenda is self-motivated. They are dependent on oil. 85% of their economy is oil. 70% of their population is under the age of 30. They've been a training ground for radical Islam. They are tearing apart. They've put the Wahhabis back in place. They're taking apart all the Islamic terrorist schools. They've killed them all. Not killed them literally, but literally torn down the schools. They have put the clerics under watch. The religious police are no longer patrolling the streets. They are trying, this young crown prince wants to enter the 21st century. He has to get through the 20th century first before he gets to the 21st. So women's rights, for example, which is a big part of his agenda. I spent hours with this young man. I spent hours with this young man. This young man is intelligent, is incredibly engaging, and he's 33. So, and there's very few adults in the room that will tell him that he's wrong. Okay? Now, I'm making a few trips into Saudi. I keep getting a return ticket. I am one of those that have that privilege. I really do think that we have to help him not make chronic mistakes. And he's just learned a very big lesson. He's asking the world to treat Saudi Arabia as a modern state, a G20 country that demands respects. The other side of that is you are now being held to international standards. So he's just learnt that international standards, okay, can be really tough on an agenda where you're not getting your way. He has a war in Yemen. He put the prime minister or president, whatever it was, of Lebanon in jail. And something happened at that embassy, which I don't know specifically what happened, but it was out of control.
A journalist was murdered.
Yeah, but in terms of whether he ordered it or not, I don't have any data on that. But what I'm saying is, this is stuff that can't happen on the international stage. He's learnt that lesson. And frankly, if you look at Iraq, back to my earlier point, if it's not him, who do you want in charge? Do you want an Iraq and Saudi? Okay, no. So it's better to find a way to keep supporting him and let him show us that he can be a leader that is worthy of our support. And frankly, those who are supporting him, okay, are helping the country, but helping the course of Middle East peace.
Andrew, something tells me that since you've stepped down as chair, as CEO, that suddenly you're not lazing around doing barbecues on Sunday afternoons. In fact, that you're busier these days. We know about your commitment with THI. Clearly, you've got the Saudis now that you're consulting. And don't ask me how I found this out, but I happen to know that Sir Richard Branson's been chasing all around Darwin trying to find you today. No, I'm not joking.
Telephone calls, yeah. Yeah, I tried to call him from the Pratt markets. It wasn't an appropriate place, but yeah. So the question is, am I busier?
Is, one, are you busier? Two, what does Richard Branson want?
So Sir Richard has put together a team that I'm on of global leaders that are developing, it's called the B team, and it's trying to develop, as the name suggests, Plan B for the world. He's very convinced that Plan A is failing, that Western civilization is dying, that the descent to anarchy is upon us, that the AI world is going to take over, singularity will arrive, and that we're polluting the planet. We have nothing in our future that suggests we're going to get global cooperation on things like climate change. So he's put together for the last 2 years, I've been working with him on this, and so have a lot of other leaders, a plan B,
Okay.
which is to rebuild how humanity exists on this planet. And in the meantime, he and Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos are putting plans to take a bunch of us to another planet. And this is not science fiction. This is real things. Okay?
Us humanity or us you guys?
Good question. Who gets a ticket? I have nothing to say about that. But no, mass transport.
Yeah.
So these rockets that are going up, there are passenger flights. Virgin Galactic, Virgin Orbit will have the world's first passenger flights into space next year. I'm very involved with him on that. And what he's planning to do is to actually make mass transports. And they're building this idea of a big space station in the outer space that will receive humanity, citizens, that then relays them to Mars. And Bezos, Musk, you think this is crazy, and sometimes when you look at Musk and Bezos, you think they are crazy. But Sir Richard, he's one of the ones working on this.
Okay.
So that's his plan B. You had another part of your question. What
Well,
was
the other part of the question was, I think you've partially answered it, was now that you're no longer running the big chemical company, what's the next mountain to climb? But it sounds like you've already started climbing it.
I guess the best way I can answer it in a short way is I've had a privileged life and career, coming from this very small town, giving me what it did, but my education, my parents, my Uncle Les, my family, my wife, all of us around the world doing what I did. I got a podium. I got to be with great, interesting people. I learned a lot of things along the way. I don't want to waste any of that. I want to take all that and get an ROI. Not an ROI as in return on investment, but a return on impact. I want to make a positive impact in Act 2. And I'm going to have to be judicious on my choices, because I could maybe make a regional impact here. And there's some things that I could maybe do help here. I could make an impact in Australia. I could make an impact in the Middle East. I can make an impact in a lot of places. I've got to be watchful that there's still only 24 hours in a day until Elon Musk and everyone else solves the singularity issue. So I'm trying to figure that out. I've got over a dozen assignments right now. I just want to keep learning.
Sure.
And I learn by being in a very impactful environment. My family knows that. And they know that I've got energy, and so none of that's changed just because I've retired from Dow.
Sure. I've got one last thought rather than question I'd like to share with you before I open to the floor, and we've got time, do we, Fiona, for 2 or 3 questions? And I wanted to share this little story as we discussed this afternoon. The last time I saw you, you sat next to me as my guest at an AFL match at the SCG, and there you were amongst 40,000 people wearing your baseball cap and your sneakers. I presume they were Under Armour.
They were?
Yeah.
Did you know that?
And because I know that Dow's supplying them with this magic little soul thing.
Yeah.
And while you were looking at the football, I was looking at you and I was thinking, I wonder how many of these 40,000 people realise the stature of the man who's here, Mr. Ordinary, having hamburgers with the rest of us.
It was organic hamburgers.
And it reminded me, and I shared this with you today, and that's why I'd like to get your take on it, of a famous rock star who said to me once that being trapped in opulent isolation is no reward for success. You've seen a lot of opulence. Tell me your thoughts about being trapped in opulent isolation as part of success.
Look, the greatest gift that you can give Paula and I is anonymity. The greatest gift you can give us is our family and our being with our family. Our greatest gift is being with our friends and loved ones. And I've never seen this success as, the job is for me to treat the success model as I'm some sort of iconic, achiever. I think that's all garbage.
So it's not Eos Andrew?
No. It is Archon. I'm an Archon. I got an Archon bestowed upon me by the Patriarch. But I look, the awards, all of that stuff along the way, they're great memories and they're great things. But that isn't the point. The point is that you can be a person, living as a normal person. We had a great event last night at Cha, where Andrew organised a bunch of my high school mates to turn up, who I've kept in touch with over the years, and some of them I hadn't seen in a long time. And, they were on my basketball team, and they were just I was just a normal person to them, and they treated me as a normal person back. And that's all I wanted, okay? That's all I want. So that, I didn't know you were watching me, and your Swans lost that day, by the way. And,
that's why I didn't invite you back.
At the prep markets today, I'm on the corner on the phone trying to get on Richard Branson, and this Chinese gentleman stops me and says, Andrew Liveris. And I'm thinking, okay, who's this? And so he had a baseball cap on, and he was there with his family members, and he starts introducing himself. I have to actually say, I'll call you back. And it was a gentleman who recognized me, who was in your legislature at one point in time, now retired, and just recognized me off the street. I spent 15 minutes chatting to them and the family, and I just feel that if someone's going out of their way to say hello to you, you should be respectful back to them. Humility, I think it's a very important point, and anonymity, we revere it.
Yeah. Andrew, if I may, on behalf of everybody in the room, we thank you for a window on your heart and your mind this evening. Andrew Liveris.
Thank you.
Thank you. Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.